Well, we are going to be focused almost exclusively on what's going on right now in Egypt. We'll have the great Michael Ledeen with us, old friend of mine, former UN Ambassador John Bolton. But I want to talk about this because all through the wasted days leading up to, during, and after the State of the Union speech, I think I was the only one talking about this. Our nation's focus. I mean, this stuff was going on earlier this week in Egypt. So we have riots in Egypt. Before that, Tunisia. Before that, Ireland. Before that, Britain. Before that, Greece. So it's not just North Africa. That should be obvious. And they all started over economic matters. You're going to be watching a lot of just bad reporting right now. Just bad reporting. The overthrow of the Tunisian regime occurred because of the skyrocketing food prices. And then it became more of a quote-unquote democratic movement. The skyrocketing food and other prices, gasoline prices in Egypt, massive unemployment, started the riots there too. The economies started the riots in Ireland and Greece and the student protests in the UK. They're democracies. Now, we're all looking at this. We're all wondering about it. What's occurring in Egypt, to me, certainly doesn't smell like a democracy movement, although it could develop into a democracy movement. Although there are certainly elements in the riots and protests, particularly the young people out of the colleges and so forth, who view it as a democracy movement. But it's just as likely to develop into a theocracy movement. Since the main opposition party, the best organized operation there is the Muslim Brotherhood, a fanatic, fundamentalist, Islamic party outlawed by Mubarak, that gave birth to Al-Qaeda. The only truly remaining Arab democracy in the Middle East is Iraq, which couldn't have happened without American efforts, and by the way, which most liberals in this country opposed. So, I'm not confident that even if this develops into a quote-unquote democracy movement, that it's going to wind up being a democracy, if in fact Mubarak is forced out, which we don't know yet. But what's most important to me is what's best for the United States of America. I don't dabble in the abstract and the theoretical. Well, we want to support democracy. No, we want to support America in every way we can. For the most part, yes, that means democracy movements. But if they're democracy movements that turn into theocracy movements, in any event, matters that we can't control, then I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. This Mubarak has helped put down jihadis. If this were occurring in Iran, of course, we'd be cheering. It almost did occur in Iran, and we wanted it to occur in Iran, but our government was slow to respond, as was the rest of the world, because that would have clearly been in our interests, overthrowing the Islamo-Nazi regime there. The reason I'm more cautious than others is because I remember what happened in Iran in 1979 with the Shah. That was a so-called democracy movement too. And eventually that democracy movement, and the Shah left, the main opposition party, the head of that party, had temporary reign over the country. He turned it over to him. He freed all the political prisoners. He dissolved the internal police force, or the secret police force. And to show that he was serious about reform, he invited the Ayatollah Khomeini to come back after being in exile for so long. And he asked Khomeini to form a Vatican-like state within a state. And he said he would call for free elections and a constitution, and he wanted a national unity government. And Khomeini undermined him from day one, outwitted him. The battle took to the streets. The Revolutionary Guard refused to participate. And now we have a huge threat to America and the rest of the world in this Islamo-fascist regime in Iran. So people cheering, yes, we have a democracy movement. I don't know what kind of movement we have. Do you? I don't know where this will end. Do you? There was an uprising, a significant uprising in the 1970s against Mubarak, and he put it down. I don't mean against Mubarak. I mean against the government of Egypt. Now, look at Lebanon. Lebanon is a putative democracy. Hezbollah just took it over. Look at the Gaza Strip. That was to be a democratic territory for the Palestinians to show how they could govern themselves. It's now a terrorist launching pad. Hamas controls it. There are no real elections. I'm not convinced if Mubarak goes or however this winds up that it's going to wind up with some kind of democratic government in the end. Jordan is a monarchy. Should the king of Jordan step down too? Notice it's the so-called moderate Arab states that are facing problems right now. Not Iran, not Syria. I'm certain Syria and Iran are all excited about this. They're rooting for this. I'm also certain Israel and Jordan and the other so-called moderate Arab states are not. Reporters keep calling this a democratic uprising. How do they know this? They're not even there. What they want it to be and what it is, well, that's two different things. And what it'll wind up is a completely different thing. By the way, as for the Shah of Iran, I know it's fashionable, it's PC. Yeah. The Shah's father sided with America and Russia in World War II against the Nazis. He made it possible for us to funnel enormous amounts of material through that part of the world into Russia to help defeat the Nazis. The Muslim Brotherhood was aligned with the Nazis. The precursor to the PLO was aligned with the Nazis. I just wanted you to know that historical fact. But you know, there are broader lessons than all of this for us here in the United States. When you see this going on all over the world, it's a reminder that our capitalist economic system is the most successful anywhere. And it enables us to grow our own food, to provide our own health care, to create shelter, to make clothing, in other words, to take care of ourselves. Government's constant effort to regulate it, tax it, and manipulate it, redistributing wealth, nationalizing businesses, this is what creates poverty, dislocations, misery. You can see all these authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. It destroys the civil society. In our country, our government simply has too much power over our natural resources, choking off coal, choking off oil production, driving up fuel prices, and creating dislocations of some sort. Ethanol policies, driving up the price of food in this country. All government-driven. The Federal Reserve monetizing the debt to give a temporary bump in the economy to help Obama. That is printing money to buy our own debt rather than simply and only maintaining a stable currency, which is the job of the Federal Reserve. These are economically destructive policies. They are authoritarian policies that are enforced on our society by a small elite, but they have a real and deleterious effect on our people. Housing, unemployment, the value of the currency. There are other lessons. When the law bends to enforce increasingly authoritarian decisions, the law ceases to be a tool for a stable society. The law ceases to be moral. This is why the Constitution must be complied with. This is why we revere it. This is why when top officials ignore it or manipulate it, whether the president and Congress or judges, they endanger the foundation of this society. Because in lieu of the Constitution comes political expediency, which leads, ultimately, to anarchy, which you see right now in these other countries. And when we see efforts, as we did last week, a pretext to stifle free speech protected by the First Amendment, members of Congress actually talking about introducing laws to limit what we can say, or other efforts by the government, including attacks on the Supreme Court Citizen United case, which simply expanded free speech. Well, we shouldn't be cheering on officials and their supporters for defying the Constitution. These efforts are a direct attack on our civil society. There are efforts underway right now to regulate and control the Internet, talk radio, free political speech during elections. This is why we, a free people, oppose all of this. We see what's going on in Egypt. We see what goes on in these other places. The president and his party are even proposing that the federal government have the power with the flick of a switch to shut down the Internet. Well, look what happens. They shut down the Internet in Egypt. Why would we do that? Why would we give our government that kind of power? We Americans know better than our politicians that our country is in fact exceptional because our society and our form of government are not like any others. This is why we reject demands that we copy the Europeans. This is why we reject the constant lectures from the president and others who insist that America is basically no different than any other society. Yes, we are different, and thank God we are different. Our nation was founded on respect for the individual. Our nation was founded on respect for private property rights. That is, respect for your labor. Our society was founded on respect for traditions and institutions tested over time, which improve our communities. And as long as we remain that kind of a society, a free society, where the individual has value, where his labor is protected, that is his private property, where the government is limited and dispersed and constitutional, we won't suffer what they suffer today in Egypt and they suffer in other countries all over the world. Because America is better, because America embraces the civil society and America embraces constitutional republicanism. And when we embrace capitalism, we feed ourselves, we clothe ourselves, and we house ourselves. The only thing that can get into the way of us continuing to be a prospering society is the central government. When we come back, more on Egypt and the Middle East. I just want to be clear about something from my perspective. Now we have another country we have to worry about. This is a big country in a hugely strategic place. I'm not cheering for this because I haven't seen grassroots democratic governments created over there in the Middle East. Not one.